Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Christian Gare, and on behalf of the Mission of Norway to the European Union, I have the great pleasure of welcoming you all to today's event. We're going to talk about the future of the Arctic. In fact, we're going to talk about home, because that's also what the Arctic is. And that's certainly the case with the 4 wonderful youth representatives that we have with us here today. And I think you'll find it fascinating to listen to them. Someone who'll be listening particularly carefully today is Michael Mann. He's the EU Special Envoy for Arctic Matters. And as many of you know, the EU is currently in the process of updating its Arctic policy, which means we'll be listening very carefully to what Michael has to say as well. And then we're delighted to have our own Marte Siolkovsky, political advisor at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with us from Oslo today to get the show safely on the road. But before we get to that, just a couple of quick house rules, and I really invite all of you to take today's event as an opportunity to engage and ask questions. Maybe you want to know more about reindeer herding, or about the Barents Youth Council, or what climate change really feels like up in the high north. Well, for a smooth debate, please submit your policy-related questions by clicking the Ask button. By that, you can use the question and answers section. And please state your name and affiliation, and as well to whom among the speakers you'd like to address your question. And if you have any general comments or technical questions, well, you can use the chat function for that. But now it's over to Marte in Oslo for your introductory remarks. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Christian. Dear all, it is a pleasure to attend this seminar together with EU Special Envoy on Arctic Matters, Michael Mann, and of course the excellent youth representatives. We really appreciate our close cooperation with the EU in the Arctic, and we value our dialogue in the Arctic Council, the Barents Euro-Arctic Council, the Northern Dimension, and EU's cross-border programs. We were also really pleased to be able to provide input to the EU's new Arctic policy last autumn. Now, the Arctic is Norway's most important area of strategic responsibility. Our Arctic policy revolves around our core national interests, including domestic policy and foreign and security policy priorities. An important reason for this is, of course, our neighbor, Russia. But the increased international interest in the Arctic, the more constrained the global security situation, and the rapid-paced, extremely worrying climate changes taking place all play a part as well. As you all know from the map, Norway is an Arctic coastal state with vast land and sea territory above the Arctic Circle. The Norwegian Arctic is not covered in snow and ice. It is a vibrant, modern society where 9% of the Norwegian population live. That is why our Arctic policy is about the people who live, work, and raise their children in the north. It is about modern, robust, high-tech communities with infrastructure, businesses, schools, universities, football fields, basically everything that you would expect there would be in any other social society. And it is about making sure that our part of the Arctic remains strong, resilient, and prosperous for coming generations by promoting value creation and employment and safeguarding environmental and social sustainability. Norway's recent white paper on the Arctic was presented to the Storting in November last year, and it reaffirms our commitment to international cooperation in the Arctic based on respect for international law and existing multilateral frameworks. The white paper highlights the importance of domestic policy issues in the Arctic. It is in Norway's national security and economic interests to support viable communities in the region. And the best political processes are built on knowledge, expertise, and facts. The white paper is the result of a broad stakeholder process. Over a period of 2 years, we conducted more than 100 conversations with counties, municipalities, the Sametinget, our Sami Parliament, and key stakeholders from the business sector, various organizations, and knowledge institutions. Solid planning for the future means listening to the voices of young people. With this in mind, we established a youth panel consisting of 50 members from different parts of North Norway, representing various backgrounds and interests. We spoke to each and every member, and all of them gave us really valuable and clever insights. The Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and various other ministers attended discussions organized by the panel. And most importantly, the youth panel provided an impressive report with recommendations on how our Arctic societies can attract young people. The youth panel's recommendations open with: a good Arctic policy does not have to be lofty, but must be targeted more specifically towards the people in North Norway. The focus should not just be on climate change and the environment in the Arctic, on fish quotas, or on espionage. Norway's Arctic policy should focus on those of us who live here. It is the young people in North Norway who are the region's future. I think we can all learn from this. So let me conclude by underlining the importance of bringing youth to the table. As our youth panel made clear, real youth involvement is taking actual part in policy making. I'm therefore really looking forward to today's discussion with insightful young representatives from Sweden, Finland, and Norway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your introductory remarks, Marte. Michael, you've recently said in an interview that when you went to visit the Arctic, you fell in love. We certainly hope to welcome you back in Norway soon, but who knows when that's going to be possible. In the meantime, we're so happy to have you with us here today in this virtual conference. And it's my pleasure to hand the floor over to you, Michael, please, for your introductory remarks.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Christian, for the introduction. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Norwegian mission to the EU and Euractiv for bringing us together today for this very important discussion. I think it comes at a perfect moment. As you said yourself, work has now started on the update of the EU's Arctic policy. We hope to publish our new blueprint for the Arctic in the last quarter of this year. And thanks very much to everyone in Norway who's contributed to the process so far. Just today, in fact, we published the summary of and the individual contributions to our public consultation on the future of the EU's engagement in the Arctic. This process attracted 140 contributions from governments, regions, NGOs, business, academia, indigenous peoples groups, and individual citizens. And I think it's fair to say that Norway was among the very biggest contributors to this process. These papers and my contacts with stakeholders have illustrated the clear need for us as EU policymakers to listen to and engage with young voices who actually live in the Arctic. This is the only way for us to understand properly how you envisage your future. It also gives us a perspective we cannot possibly have ourselves. No matter how young I like to think I am, I have to accept that I'm not, and that I see things from the viewpoint of a middle-aged man. It's also been very inspiring for us to learn from the Norwegian example of inclusive policymaking through the help of the youth panel that Marta just mentioned. I myself was greatly encouraged by a meeting that I had late last year with a very, very impressive group of representatives from the Arctic Youth Network and from Youth Environment Europe. The past couple of years has witnessed the publication of a large number of Arctic policy papers, both from Arctic states and from countries far away from the Arctic, who nonetheless see the geopolitical importance of what is happening there. And it's surprising to me and to many that only now are we seeing the requisite amount of attention being paid to the views of young people. From an EU perspective, your voices have special importance for several reasons. First of all, young people obviously have a clear stake in climate change and other irreversible environmental changes. Young people have, thank goodness, a tendency to push for higher ambitions. If we are to properly understand Arctic ways of life, we need to hear young people's perspectives and insights. Young people are, of course, the future of Arctic regions, but they're also the present, and not to pay heed to their views is simply not an option. Young people are important innovators. In our policy update, we aspire to unlock the potential of sustainable development in Arctic regions for the benefit not just of the Arctic, but also for the rest of the world. We foresee a policy update with continued focus on climate change, on sustainable development, and on international cooperation, underpinned by cutting-edge science and local knowledge, particularly indigenous knowledge. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panel what they think and how this can be achieved. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your introductory remarks and kind words as well. As we've heard from the high officials, the voices of the youth of the Arctic really matter a lot if we want to understand and do good in and for the Arctic. So it's about time we hear from those voices here today. I'd like us to start in Umeå. That's a city of about 90,000 people in the northeast of Sweden. And there we have Petter Lundström. He's a student of political science. He's 22 years old. And Petter, I was lucky to visit your charming town and the big university you have back in October 2019 when Sweden and the EU put up a big conference on the Arctic there. And now we're very lucky to have you with us today to speak to us. So over to you, Petter.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here as the first Petter of the day. I actually come from Roknäs, a village of about 1,000 inhabitants outside of Piteå in Norrbotten, Sweden. And I would like to paint you a picture from my early life in Roknäs. And from this picture, polarization and depopulation and climate change could be understood by observation, even in Little Roknäs. I want you to imagine two groups of people. The first group is the people staying in their hometown, getting local jobs, finding love, settling down early, close to their roots. They seek opportunity of stable jobs that occupy limited energy and time. The second group are those that engage in longer education, start their families later than others, settle down close to jobs that utilize their education, and so on. They seek self-fulfilling jobs that enable social and economic advancement to a higher extent. And these differences between the groups, they infer that the groups end up on different sides of political divisory lines. Globalism and protectionism, for example, nationalism and supranationalism. Most notably, perhaps, is centrum periphery, as well as disagreement on the implications of climate change. And against this backdrop, several notable matters of concern could be understood as resulting from the cultural differences that are observable even in Little Roknäs. And the EU may bridge these differences by facilitating conditions of life suitable for both these groups at once. For example, it could be utilizing competitive advantages of climate and terrain, creating jobs of varying qualifications for both groups. It could be development of biofuel technology that would facilitate circular economy while including car-dependent societies in the process, because car dependency is widespread in the region. Tourism development is also an example that could promote sustainable consumption for the globally oriented ones, while providing jobs for the localists. And the EU may, of course, tackle this as they please, but the key seems to be to accommodate the demands of both of these groups simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you, Petter. That was really excellent. And thanks for your challenging insights, how to get young people engaged in climate change, how to bridge divides, and the EU's role potentially in all of this. It's time now to continue our journey further north. We'll cross the border from Sweden into Norway. But as we do that, we will stay within the traditional territories of the Sami, the indigenous people living in Finland, in Norway, in Sweden, and in Russia. And two of today's youth representatives are also representatives of the Sami people. And first out is Inga Maria Lango. She lives in Kautokeino. Kautokeino is Norway's largest municipality. It has the size of almost 10,000 square kilometers, but a population of around 3,000 people. Inga-Maria, she's 20 years old. She's a reindeer herder. She's also a student of veterinary medicine and a member of the Norwegian Arctic Youth Panel. So it's my pleasure to hand the floor over to you, Inga-Maria, please.
Hello, everyone. At first, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to convey the reindeer herding industry's challenges as one of the indigenous culture-based industries of the North. As Christian said, my name is Inga-Maria. I'm 20 years old, and I'm from Kautokeino in the northern part of Norway. Our village, where we have about 90% of people living off reindeer herding. My future in the reindeer husbandry is unfortunately threatened by big developments, among them a mining industry called Nussir ASA, who has gotten convention to mine in our pastures. This is really burdening for me as a young reindeer herder. My family live off reindeer herding, just as our ancestors have for hundreds of years. I'm really proud of belonging to this industry and group of people who have preserved our language, culture, and traditions despite strong assimilation politics. But when we talk about the future of the Arctic, then long-term thinking is really important. The Arctic is rich of different types of nature resources. These resources could give us a lot today, and we all think that we have to take advantage of that for today's generation. But if we want the Arctic to stay as we love it today, then we should not be selfish, and we should think about the future and ask ourselves what we think our own descendants are going to live off if we dig out everything today. Mining industries and other developments are threatening for our future. Green industry is supposed to be green, but how green is it when it goes on our expenses? I speak for all reindeer herders when I say that our voices are not being heard, when we say that there is no more room. And eventually there won't be any room for our own culture to develop in these conditions. But I would claim that traditional Sami reindeer husbandry is environmentally friendly and sustainable. It is rational and very beautiful. It produces the world's best meat, and it is also supporting beam of our Sami culture. And also, it is a big part of my identity. And then I also think I speak for many Sami reindeer herding youth when I say that the uncertainty around our industry is stressful, partly because my future in reindeer husbandry lies in the hands of people and companies with owners from abroad. I hope that there will be arranged so that we young people also have a future in reindeer husbandry, that we get the opportunity to establish ourselves and invest in reindeer husbandry. I would like to remind you that the Arctic Plateau is not a waste area, that we are here, and that the whole of northern parts of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia is in use by Sami reindeer husbandry. We do not want to put a stop to development, but the development of the industries should not be at our expense. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Inga-Maria, very much for your very important and interesting points and making us think what we really mean when we talk about sustainable development, for example. Great points for the upcoming discussion. We're now moving to Finland, where we meet Enni Similä. She's the chair of the Sami Youth Association in Finland, and she's also a student at the Institute for Sami Culture and Language Studies at the University of Oulu. She's 24 years old, and she's also engaged in an EU-related project called Filling the Sápmi EU Knowledge Gap. And we are definitely hungry for more knowledge, Enni. So the chance is now yours to deliver your initial remarks. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Christian. Dear participants, dear youth, and dear friends of the Arctic. First of all, I would like to thank this opportunity to participate in this webinar and talk about this important issue. The Previous speaker, Inga-Maria, already pointed some same issues that I have in my intervention. And I want you to think about the importance of these issues when two young Sami women are raising the topics in this conversation. As Arctic indigenous youth who have lived in the Arctic for my whole life, I see that the voice of the youth and the voice of the indigenous youth is really important to include in the conversation of the future Arctic. I believe this includes the right to choose to continue the traditional way of life in the Arctic. Young people need to have a choice to continue practicing their traditional livelihoods and not to be forced to move away. One way of securing this right is that the decision makers respect the free, prior, and informed consent in the Arctic. The Sami people have lived in the Arctic since time immemorial. Our life depends on the land and connection with the land. Without the land, there is no us. Our culture, livelihoods, and the way of life is interconnected with the land. But now the climate change and industrialism in the name of the climate change is threatening our way of life. Indigenous people are the least responsible of the climate change, but we, as Arctic indigenous people, are the first to suffer the consequences of the climate change. The climate change is affecting to our way of life and it's creating additional burden to our shoulders. Samis have to try to adapt to the changing environment, and at the same time, new industrial developments are approaching us. The Samis are threatened to lose their land to renewable energy production, such as windmill parks, mines, and new infrastructure. Reindeer herding and such industrial projects in reindeer's traditional grazing lands cannot coexist. As Sami youth, I am afraid of future in the Arctic. Change of the land use is happening rapidly and grazing lands of the reindeer are under threat. We and our children should have the possibility to practice traditional livelihoods without having to be afraid of the future or our well-being. And I also want to echo what Mr. Mann said in the beginning, that the youth are not only the future, but we are the present. So in conclusion, I would say that for me, this means that it is important to secure that the young people are able to choose their life in the Arctic, that the industrial developers who are guests in the Arctic are to respect the free, prior, and informed consent. Kiitos Ollu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enni, for your clear messages and helping us fill some knowledge gaps already, and maybe also helping generate new questions. I will just repeat my invitation to everyone's viewing and listening this conference to enter questions in the Q&A section by clicking Ask if you have any questions. But now it's the turn of Petter again, but it's a different Petter this time. We'll hear from Petter Hov Jacobsen. He's a student at the Arctic University of Norway at the campus in Tromsø, the city of Tromsø, which is also called the Paris of the North. He's 20 years old, studying for a bachelor's degree in Russian language and politics. I believe Petter is also passionate about international cooperation, about many things, and a member of the Norwegian Arctic Youth Panel. So Petter, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Christian, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. As Christian mentioned, I've recently participated in delivering the recommendations for the government from the youth on the occasion of the white paper on the northern area in Norway. It is through this work specifically that I've been honored with representing Norwegian youth in this meeting. I would like to use this opportunity to ask some questions to Mr. Mann. Firstly, young people in Norway and young representatives I've talked to from other Arctic countries have all pointed out a very specific issue that they're concerned about. We live almost as north as you can get, and people, mostly young people, are fleeing south or out of the country. In our recommendations for the government, we are enlightening this very issue and confronting the population's negative attitude towards the region. It involves many things, but damaging the reputation is the main issue. Studies have shown that if you get your education in the north, the chances of you staying in the region are significantly higher. My question is, how can the European Union actively work for people to stay in the Arctic? My second question and topic does not limit itself to the Arctic. Last year, I was lucky enough to publish an official Norwegian report on issues concerning equality in Norway, focused in particular on youth. Unfortunately, the report is not translated to English, but I want to specifically target one area of concern. We live in troubling times. Even before the pandemic, racism, discrimination, and bullying were huge problems. About 50,000 children report that they've been exposed to bullying in Norway. Now, during different stages of isolation, lockdown, and quarantine, people have been more dependent on their social medias and digital tools. These platforms lack a sense of censorship and filters. Therefore, room for all sorts of mental abuse have increased rapidly, and I believe these issues may directly or indirectly lead to physical issues. I'm aware that the European Union already are working on digital acts published already in 2020, but how would these in general prevent bullying and racism? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petter, for your very interesting points that you've added to the conversation about young people leaving, about the importance of education taking place in the north, the importance also of the digital bullying, and a number of other issues. And so thank you for sharing them. I want to now give the chance to Michael Mann for a round of responding to the points and challenges and questions that you've received from the youth representatives. So please, Michael, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, Christian, and thanks very much to all the youth representatives. I must say that my first observation is that I think the future of the Arctic looks in very safe hands. Not only, are you extremely well informed, obviously, but you're also extremely good at expressing your concerns and your points of view. So I think very much I have a sense of optimism that you will be able to get your messages across to policymakers like myself. It's a bit difficult to wrap everything that you've set up into a very short answer, but I mean, I think what I would say initially is that I think perhaps in the past, authorities in general have been guilty of paying lip service to the views of people who live in the Arctic, to indigenous peoples and also to young people. I mentioned in my introductory remarks that perhaps you haven't been listened to enough in the past. Just let me say that it's very clear to us that we have to genuinely take it seriously. You have knowledge living in the Arctic and being also from Sami communities that we simply don't have sitting in Brussels. The point about how a project that looks fantastic from Brussels in terms of whether it be green energy, wind power or whatever, just has a very different look when you get on the ground and you find that your traditional reindeer herding lands have been threatened by this. So we are very aware of these concerns and that we realize that what looks good from here doesn't necessarily look good on the ground. So that is something that we have taken on board. Whatever we do in our Arctic policy making, first of all, it has to be based very, very strongly on the local knowledge of people who live in the Arctic, particularly indigenous peoples. And also, we have a very scientific approach as well. Perhaps the biggest calling card of the European Union's Arctic policy thus far has been our involvement in science and research and innovation, working with our partners like Norway, for example. So I think that's been very strong. We have been watching with interest the various lawsuits that have been going on in the northern countries aimed at safeguarding these traditional lands, these traditional ways of life. And in our policy making, we are very, very conscious of the fact that people cannot be expected to just see their traditional ways of life disappearing. We are aware that the effects of climate change are having an effect and therefore our number one priority perhaps is internationally to slow down the effects of climate change and to try and mitigate it in the Arctic. We are aware that we shouldn't encourage projects that are either environmentally unsustainable or socio-economically unsustainable. We talk a lot about sustainable development in the European Union, but I think a lot of people don't really know what it means. Partly this is an environmental sustainability that we're looking at, but we also think in terms of sustainable development as being socio-economic sustainability. In other words, we will try to encourage the creation of jobs and of educational opportunities in Arctic regions, specifically to offer people who live in the Arctic, people who have always lived in the Arctic, to have long-term perspectives for an economic future, whether it be assistance to people continuing their traditional way of lives or introducing the possibility for innovators to come up with sort of future-orientated projects. What we would like to see is that through European assistance, whether it be regulatory assistance or financial assistance or just best practice, we can provide the conditions where people can be guaranteed to get a good education. Petter, I think it was mentioned that if you've been educated in the north, you're far more likely to stay in the north. We also want to provide a sort of menu for people who have innovative ideas to perhaps develop new technologies, because we think that there is the potential for the Arctic regions to be a sort of test bed where modern forward-looking technologies are developed that can have an application all across the world and help the Arctic regions to be economically strong, but also help Europe to be economically strong in terms of being ahead of the curve when it comes to the green transition, for example. But of course, taking into account the point that both Inger Meyer and Eni made, that these green energy projects also have to be responsible and respective of the people who live there and the traditional ways of life. The two specific questions that Petter asked, I think I've partly answered number one. It's all about using European Union assistance to provide good educational opportunities, whether it be simply through better connectivity or whether it be through the encouragement of university programs or twinning programs between universities. And so I think, we understand that investment has to be responsible investment that will actually encourage people to stay, people to think of new ideas, and people to be able to do the things that they've done through the generations as well. On the social media thing, I think that's a very, very important point that many people don't really talk enough about. I mean, I think what's happened in the US recently has very much brought home to people the often rather damaging effects that social media can have. We're aware that particularly with the COVID crisis and with the increasing impact of social media on people's lives, it can lead to cyberbullying, it can lead to issues with depression. And so the European Union, and I think Petter already recognized this, has got a number of platforms together, partly in its digitalization and its digital policy making. We're trying to set strict rules for social media providers and tech companies. But also we have a sort of system of peer pressure where these companies come together in a platform and really are competing with each other, hopefully, to try and stamp out some of the more damaging practices that go on social media. I hope I've sort of answered some of your questions. Obviously, it's rather difficult to remember everything, but I hope that's been a good starting point anyway. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael, for your very comprehensive and wide-ranging answers. But I'd still like to give our representatives up in the Arctic the chance to come back, perhaps with some follow-up questions or comments at this point. So I'd like to do that by the same order of appearance that we had for the first round, meaning we'll go to our first Petter of the day in Sweden, Umeå, for some follow-up points. It's over to you, Petter.
Yes, thank you. Well, we heard a bunch of interesting remarks. I think it is important in discussions like this to actually try to break up the strategic reasoning into examples and concrete policy, like Michael did with the menu of innovation and such. But you mentioned the thing with lawsuits and the development of wind power, and one of the main themes to account for between reasoning about the Sami interest and the majority society is the typical image of balance between the Sami and the economic interest of the rest of society is that this is directly incompatible. But it could be phrased into a question like, are there any ways of economic or industrial development within Sami territory that would not be at odds with the Sami interest?
Thank you very much, Petter. I'd invite Michael to hold his thoughts, and then we'll go through the remaining three representatives with their comments before we hand back to you, Michael. And then it's to turn to Inga-Maria in Kautokeino for her comments, please.
Thank you. I just like to say that we are people of 4 countries, and that's something that I think everyone needs to remember. And we'd like for change and developments to happen in pact with our own premises, because previously we've experienced, like in my in my district, we've experienced that they gave this mining industry consultation. I mean, they just let them start mining without really listening to us and what our needs were. And reindeer husbandry is sustainable, and of course we'd like to keep it that way. And then something that's very known in our thinking way is that we never take more than we require from the nature. It goes when we fish, when we go to get wood, when we slaughter reindeer. We just take what we need. We don't take more than that. That's just like some basic things. And we like to be included early in consultations when it comes to developments in different cases.
Thanks, Inga-Maria. Very clear points. And it's now over to Enni again in Finland. Over to you, please.
Thank you. Yes, I think those are important points that Inga-Maria is raising. And Sami people, they have so much valuable traditional knowledge that is important to take into account when talking about the future in the Arctic. And in fact, I think that the Sami people and the youth should be able to participate in these discussions in the EU that are related to the Arctic. And as Christian mentioned in the beginning, I am working in this project called Filling the EU Sapmi Knowledge Gaps. And in fact, the idea of the project is to build internal capacity in Sapmi towards the EU. So we are getting ready to that those conversation and that relationship in the Sami society. And in fact, I would like to ask from Mr. Mann that how can the EU help secure the traditional way of life in the future in the Arctic, and how can the Sami people become true partners in the EU? Thank you.
Thank you, Enni. That's also very clearly stated points here for Michael to address afterwards. We have one more youth representative to go before that, and that's our second Petter of the day up in Tromsø. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Christian. And I would just like to follow up Michael Mann's answer for my questions earlier. Firstly, about the universities in the northernmost part of Norway, Finland, and Sweden. They must have a cooperation which leads to more students traveling across the borders and bringing their competence across the borders. For example, if we look at companies that promote exchanges to other countries, they mostly just promote traveling to both the US or Southern Africa or Asia. But if we could just make cooperation with other universities across local countries and in Europe, I think that would be a great way to go. On the other hand, and on my second topic, I would just like to also point out that making migration and integrating those migrating to our countries has to be much better than it is today. I experience in Norway and talking to people migrating to Norway, and especially to small places, they have some remarks considering that the integration is too slow, and the way from coming into Norway and going into work and contributing to societies is way too long. And if society and the countries could take advantage of the resources that they oppose, I think that would be a great way to go, both for making people staying in the region, but also preventing discrimination, racism, and bullying.
Thanks very much, Petter. Thank you, and thanks to all the youth representatives for their very important remarks. I think showing, on the one hand, making very relevant points for the Arctic, but also points that are relevant for young people across the world, and lots for you to talk about here, Michael. I think we've really proven why young people should be invited to the table. And what are your key takeaways so far, and how can you bring the insights you have received now and the points and the questions from the youth into the work that you do on the EU's new Arctic policy?
Well, yeah, thanks, Christian. I would very much back you up that this is probably the toughest panel I've faced yet, actually. I mean, you're very well informed and you're very good at putting across your points of view, so we're very grateful for that. We really are. I'll try and go through the points as they came up. I mean, the whole idea, in what circumstances are projects, industrial projects in Arctic regions, ever compatible with Sami ways of life, indigenous ways of life? That is, I suppose, the key question. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, for a start, we are very well aware of the overriding importance of free, prior, informed consent from local populations before we go ahead, before projects are gone ahead with. And I think, as I said before, perhaps people were guilty in the past of thinking that they were taking account of indigenous points of views and not really doing so. I mean, I think we can relatively, with our head held high, say that has improved markedly. For about the last 10 years, we've had the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue, which was actually sort of formalized about 5 or 6 years ago. And I think that's given a really useful outlet for the Indigenous peoples to give proper input into the policymakers' processes. And I think I would like to think that we do take that seriously. We're going to have one later on this year as an immediate follow-up to our work on the new Arctic policy. And I think, I would say that over the last 10 months since I've been doing this job, I've had regular contacts with Indigenous peoples groups. I've had some very good contacts with the Sami Council. And in fact, I think Eni is probably involved in this project. But when I was talking to the leaders of the Sami Council, they talked about the idea perhaps of having an internship in the European Union, of having a sort of Sami week in the European Union, and just do a lot of awareness raising. And I think some of the funds that we make available through our regional policy have actually contributed to that. And I would encourage that to follow in the continue in the future. One of the things we're going to be trying to do in our update of the policy is to try and secure the sort of programs that have been running for the last 7-year budget period for the next 7 years, starting from January this year. So hopefully we can continue that. I would also say that it's very important, as I said before, our scientific work in the Arctic has been extremely considerable over the last 7 years. We've spent an average of 20 million euros, I think, on Arctic research over the last 7 years, every year. But I think there's now a recognition in our science and research departments that this shouldn't just be sort of non-traditional research. There is a place for combining better traditional knowledge and traditional science and research with what we're doing from the sort of Brussels side as well. So I think there is an appreciation of the need to build traditional knowledge into non-traditional knowledge. On the education side, I know that there are networks of the northern universities I spoke to. I think they call themselves the Nordic 5 or the Arctic 5. So there is a lot of work going on together. And I would just at this point plug the importance of the Erasmus program. Erasmus has been a fantastic success story for the last couple of decades. But fortunately, Erasmus is now going to be increased even further for our next period of financial spending. So I can only hope that even more people will go and study in the north, at least for a certain amount of time, because only in that way can you get an insight into what it really means. It's fine to look from Brussels towards the north, but until you've actually been there, it's difficult to really appreciate it. And I was ambassador in Iceland before this job, and I know Iceland, as Christian pointed out to me earlier, is only just in the Arctic, but there was nonetheless a huge interest in students from all over the world, even African students, spending some Erasmus time in Iceland and getting a completely different perspective on the world. So I think that will probably help as well.
Thanks very much, Michael. I would just like to again repeat my invitation to everyone that's listening in and viewing this conference to put your questions through the Q&A section by clicking Ask. There are some questions there already, and we can certainly also take some more. But now I think I would like to also bring Oslo and Marte back in. She's been listening to the conversation. There's been points made that are specific to the Norwegian context, but certainly also a broader discussion at the Nordic and EU level we've seen now. And I basically just invite you to share some of your reflections at this point, Marte. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you to everyone for giving such good insights already. I can see that, especially from the Norwegian representatives, that the work hasn't stopped with just presenting the youth panel. You have obviously also developed your ideas further, and I'm very happy about that. And if I could just give you one advice, Michael, it would be to bring youth into the process early, because what we experienced was that when we asked different actors to give us examples or suggestions for what was needed to keep people in the north, and especially young people in the north, the examples that we were given were normally quite vague. But when we spoke to the youth, they were very pointed. They knew exactly what they needed and what was in their interest, and that they wanted us to hear to bring it back to the government. And I was very happy to see that. And I think that would probably help you as well if you are going into the same kind of discussions. And I think as well that the diversity of the insights that has been given also shows the diversity in the Arctic. It is a very vibrant society. It is a place where people live, as many mentioned. It's not a wasteland where it's just snow and ice, and I think we need to keep that in mind. And also, I'd just like to say that we spoke a bit about the climate changes, and that the Arctic is obviously one of the places that we would see the consequences very early on. But perhaps because of that, I think that could also be a place where we could see the solutions very early on as well, because we have technology in the north that we could use to bring up solutions that could be helpful to the rest of Norway and the rest of Europe as well, especially in the maritime industries. And they are used to living under extreme weather conditions, taking the environment into consideration to a larger extent than what we are. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well, and kind of give them the possibility to bring their ideas forward. And one thing that we did was to create an innovation fund for youth, which hopefully will bring perhaps projects within climate change to the table, but maybe in other areas as well. So I'd just like to invite you to think creatively, because there's good ideas to be taken into consideration, which the youth panel here today obviously has shown as well. And thank you very much for that.
Thanks very much, Marta. Thanks very much for your comments. So I'll now turn to the part of the program where we'll look to the questions that we received in the Q&A and some also in the chat. I'll start with this one. I don't have the full name, so I'll just skip that, but I'll direct the question to Enni. It's a question from, I believe, someone in the south of Europe, but I think it could be also relevant for anyone outside of the Arctic. And basically, having listened to your statements today, the person is asking, how can we help? How can we engage? I guess is also one way of saying it. And Enni, would you be kind to answer this question?
Yes, that's a good question, and it's also quite a wide question. So I try my best. But I think the starting point is to acknowledge the Sami people and the Sami people's rights today, traditional livelihoods and their culture, and to show support in all arenas to Sami people and the indigenous people in the Arctic.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks very much,
Enni.
Yes. Yes, please, Michael, go ahead.
Yes. I think that's a very important question, because there is a sort of general tendency to think that what is happening in the Arctic only affects people in the Arctic. But one thing that I have noticed, and it's on a bit of a macro global level, but what I have noticed is that, certainly at the sort of government and policy making level, people in southern European countries are starting to sit up and take notice of what's happening in the Arctic. It's a terrible old cliche, but they say that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. But I think it's actually true as well. I mean, we are getting a lot more buy-in to the discussion on the Arctic from non-Arctic places than we ever were before. And not just for sort of cynical business reasons, also for reasons that they realize that, what is happening there affects them, but also what they are doing affects what happens in the Arctic. So there is generally more buy-in, I think, globally about the importance of dealing with the issues in the Arctic than there ever was before, I'm glad to say.
Thanks, Michael, for adding that reflection. Very relevant. I have 2-3 questions here that I will try and bundle together, and I think they go well together. And it's about, I think it will be directed to you, Michael Mann, and the new Arctic policy. And how can you secure that youth living in the Arctic continue to participate in this conversation? And how can they be active in building a sustainable region? And does the EU have a program aimed to secure youth participation in policy development? I think that's a question for you, Michael.
Okay, I think basically it's a question of partly having some structures in place, but also partly just having a positive attitude. I mean, we do have the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue that happens regularly. We do have, as I said, the sort of programs where we help the Sami Council to sort of bridge the knowledge gap, the program that Enni was talking about. But I think it's also a question of people like me, actually, just having an open door policy. I mean, I've become, I think, in the process of the public consultation and all the sort of outreach I've been doing over the last months, I think the I'd say there were two things that came out the most strongly. One was from the sort of, shall we say, the business lobby, that we have to really make sustainable development something real rather than just something theoretical. But perhaps even more so, that we really do have to involve young people. That is something that's come up in every single forum I've spoken to. So, you know, we have an open door policy. We want to hear from young people. I think the fact that you had a panel specifically for this in the Norwegian context of updating your policy was a very good example. But we have as I mentioned earlier, we have a regular contact with Youth Environment Europe and the Arctic Youth Network. So we are very open to this, and this is not just me saying that, but it's actually true. And I would say that there is no formal program to secure youth participation, but the young people are very active. We have many inputs from them, and as we continue the process of actually writing our document, I will be having more meetings with people, and I would invite anyone who's listening from a youth organization, or if that they're just an individual, not to hesitate to contact me and my colleagues to get across any viewpoints that you might have. So partly there's a process, partly there are European programs, and youth policy is one of the big priorities in the European Commission's work at the moment. But partly there is just a question of goodwill, and we want to keep the channels of communication open.
Thanks very much, Michael. While you spoke, Petter Hov Jacobsen has asked for the floor. So please, over to you.
Yes, I would just like to also remark that there's loads of both local councils representing the youth, also regional councils and county councils, both in Norway but also in the other countries in the Arctic. We also have a platform called BRIC, which is the Barents Regional Youth Council, and also a program established by the European Union is something under the Assembly of the European Regions, which is called the YRN, the Youth Regional. It's a council of regional councils of youth representatives in the Europe. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Petter. I have a question here from Mr. Anton Mifsud Bonici. And I'll direct it first to Marte in Oslo. And the question is, should minerals and materials essential for a low carbon future be accessed in the Arctic? I guess also extracted in the Arctic could be a way of framing it. Or should other regions carry that burden without the Arctic? Marte.
Thank you. It was a very specific question. And obviously with minerals, I wish you could say that we could decide where minerals are, but unfortunately we can't. With that in mind, I think we need to keep in mind that there are conflicting interests sometimes when it comes to projects like this. And I know there has been in discussions on whether or not you should extract minerals as well. And I think for us as the government, we need to try to balance those interests the best we can, and to try to at least bring everyone to the table and try to find the best solution possible. But the best solution possible does not always mean that everyone is happy with the solution that we come up with.
Thanks for that sobering message. Oh, please, indeed, Michael, you may.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, I think. I mean, we are all now talking about the green transition. And we're also aware that for many of the minerals that we need to achieve the green transition, we are virtually 100% dependent on imports, most of which come from China. And there is a sort of growing feeling amongst policymakers and amongst the industry that there is a need for slightly more strategic autonomy in the European Union. So this is again, as Marta said, it's a very difficult balancing act. But I must also issue a slight sort of health warning, a bit of expectation management. Let's not forget that the European Union, it can legislate, it can do legislation on environmental standards, it can do legislation on perhaps, let's say, filters for factories and things like that. But we can't actually say, no, you're not allowed to do industry in these regions. So, you know, we mustn't get the idea that the European Union can fix everything. We can make recommendations, we can make legislation that affects industrial processes, but we can't turn around to a company in Norway, which isn't even in the European Union, and say, you can't do that. So, you know, we have to, as Marta says, balance the interests, but also not go beyond the powers that the European Union actually has.
Thanks, Michael. I believe Annie wanted to speak perhaps at an earlier point, but if you'd like to jump back in, you're free to do so. Please, Annie.
Yes, I just had a short comment to Michael Mann when you were talking about the Indigenous People Dialogue, that we in the Sami Council we acknowledge that, and it has been existing for a long time, and we think that now it could be a time for some next steps, and that in the Sami Council we think that it's time to explore maybe some new options how to strengthen the relationship between EU and the Sami people, and the Sami Council invites the EU to conversation to explore the opportunities.
Received. I've been talking to some of your colleagues in the Sami Council, so you know, my doors are open, my telephone is on my desk, so let's talk, and you know, who knows, perhaps we could have a sort of a young people's division of the dialogue, something of that sort. So we're open to any suggestions that you have, very much so.
Very well, thank you, Annie and Michael. We're glad that suggestions are made and things can happen as a result of our conversation here today in terms of follow-up contact. There's a question here in the Q&A that I'd like to raise with you. It's from Mualla Chirakli. I might not be pronouncing the name correctly, apologies for that. It's a question along the lines of which you would perhaps hear often in discussions about the Arctic, but not always with the youth in the room. And in fact, I would like to make a little twist on it and direct it, if possible, to Petter Lundström in Sweden. But I'll read out the question, and it's I'd like to hear the panelists' view on governance and international cooperation on the Arctic. In the specific context here of increasing interest and influence by countries such as China and Russia, and how do we ensure meaningful partnerships, etc. Now, my reason for addressing it to Petter is I would like to have the youth perspective really on international cooperation as part of the broader international governance. So if that's clear enough for you, Petter, I'd like you to have a go at answering the question.
Well, I don't know how I would have an answer that would different itself from any other answer, but a generally positive setting to international partnership, or if the question is how do we make it meaningful, then it would organizations like BRIC and such that are focused on actually creating cultural connections between local societies, that would be substantially if you compare it to like bilateral national context or such. But so the key is, I would say, if I understood the question correctly, connecting local societies and not only nations and states.
Thanks very much. Maybe I could ask Michael to come in and give his perspectives on the importance of governance and international cooperation in the Arctic, seen from the EU perspective. Please.
Yes, thanks very much, Christian. I mean, obviously, the European Union is the great international cheerleader for multilateralism and international cooperation. That's one of the main sort of priorities in our Arctic policy as well. So for us, it works well. I mean, I think to sum it up, the Arctic states and the people who live in the Arctic states are obviously the first point of call for things that happen on their territories. And obviously, if you look at the example of the Arctic Council, the decision making is taken by the Arctic states with the permanent representatives as well from the indigenous organizations. But there are certain things that also can be done on an international multilateral basis and need to be done in that way. Certain things cross borders, certain things simply cannot be dealt with purely within the Arctic states. I'm thinking, climate change is an obvious example. So I think the model that we have works very well. The European Union isn't a formal observer to the Arctic Council, but does basically have the status of a de facto observer. But we don't express our Arcticness just through the Arctic Council. We have a number of different processes. We have the Northern Dimension Policy Network, which allows us to reach out to Russia on things like the environment and transport and people to people contacts and culture and so forth. We have the Barents Euro-Arctic Council. And then, of course, there's all the work that is done internationally. Obviously, I think the biggest threat facing the Arctic regions is climate change. And so all the work that is done outside under the UN process, the Paris process, is also extremely important in that context. So we see there are many different ways of discussing Arctic issues, whether it be just among Arctic players or more internationally. But I think that the point that Petter makes is actually very important, because I, as a bureaucrat from Brussels, I tend to see things in a sort of multilateral, nation-to-nation context. But if there are ways that we can help contacts between local people, that's even better. And I think there are certain ways of doing that. There are programs that are running. And we are, for example, talking to our Canadian friends about how we can increase people-to-people contacts in different Arctic regions. So there is still work to be done there. But what has also been made very clear to me in all our outreach efforts before the review of our policy is that it's not just about national governments talking to each other. It's about indigenous groups, it's about local communities. And we do have our regional program called the Northern Periphery and Arctic Program, which is specifically designed to encourage cross-border cooperation on a whole range of things. So hopefully we can just build on that, because I think it's very important.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you for ending on that note as well when it comes to youth participation in international cooperation. It's a point that the Norwegian Arctic Youth Panel has made also. In fact, their recommendations and their entire report is available in English. We'll put it out in social media and post it on the web so that it can be accessed by anyone who's interested. And also, for that matter, the Norwegian white paper on the new Arctic policy is available in a shortened version in English as of today, I think, and it will be made available electronically for everyone who's interested. We're approaching the sort of final stretch of this program. And I'd like to make a transition to my boss, the ambassador of Norway to the European Union, for him to make his concluding remarks. But just to say that I'm really inspired, and I hope everyone feels the same way, and that they felt it's been a useful discussion. And it's my pleasure to hand over now to Rolf Einar Fife, the ambassador of Norway to the European Union, for his concluding remarks. Please, over to you, Rolf Einar.
Thank you so much, Christian. My remarks will be short, but they will be enthusiastic. We have just been witnessing extremely talented young people who represent individual talent. Michael, you referred to the eloquence and the persuasiveness of their argument, the knowledge, but I would also say they are quite representative of vibrant societies, of thriving educational institutions, of thriving reindeer herding students and communities alike, and a tradition which is well represented, I think, in the this part of the Arctic in terms of innovation. There's nothing new here in terms of trying to reconcile, to quote one of, I think it was Petter, one of the Petters, reconcile tradition and innovation. I think, Marte, you made it very clear that it is pretty innovative that through the way the Norwegian white paper on the Arctic was prepared, one basically asked the youth panel to provide concrete input, and that input was absolutely essential. I think that is pretty innovative. It's in line with also the innovation that has been exemplified by the fact that the Arctic Council, as one of the extremely rare international institutions that have included representation of indigenous people through permanent participants to discuss issues of sustainable development and a number of other key issues. The innovation we've seen, I think, is representative also of the approach the European Union is taking. And it takes, we take great pleasure, Christian and I, in working here in Brussels together with the European Union. Even though we're not members of the Union, we are extremely closely associated, and we are strategic allies in terms of improving our societies in a greener, more digital way, and to make sure that societies, human dignity, sustainable development, science are really key ingredients of our societies in order to make our communities, our local communities thrive, develop, and really take care of their welfare. So I'd like to thank all, and particularly Michael also, for basically providing signals that the voice of the youth, the voices of those extremely talented, youthful experts from those areas which are directly affected and involved day to day, not as any abstract notion, but as part of an everyday reality. Listen to them when considering what the best ways are for a union to support the best possible developments in the Arctic. I was also struck by some of the comments made in terms of questions as to what others can do for the Arctic. I think one of the first things is basically to watch what is happening there and listening carefully. And this program has been absolutely fantastic in providing input in that direction. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Rolf Einar. Great summary and some additional inspiring food for thought. And if after this you're still hungry for more, the conversation about the Arctic continues at the Arctic Frontiers Conference. It's next week. It's usually in Tromsø, but this year it's online. But it has an impressive lineup of lots of interesting topics to be discussed there. And all that's left for me to say now is just another big thank you to all the speakers for taking the time to share their insights, and to the audience for tuning in and asking questions, and of course also to our media partner, Euractiv. Thank you and goodbye.